afternoon, all you lovely people. Hope you're all doing well this morning, this afternoon. Good afternoon, all you lovely people. Hope you lot are all doing well. Hope you're doing fine. Thought I would jump on and do another quick live as regards to the report into the grooming gangs in Telford. Got quite a bit to get through this morning, but I hope you're all doing well. If you've got any questions or anything you'd like to ask, just put them into the chat, and I'll be able to answer what I can, the best I can for you guys. But I hope you're all doing well on this Wednesday afternoon. I think we got up to chapter 4. So I'm going to start with chapter 4, which is the taxi licensing and nighttime economy section of the report. Many witnesses suggested to the inquiry that I should recommend that taxi drivers are only able to operate in the areas in which they were licensed. In other words, only Telford licensed drivers should be allowed to operate in the town. The law does not currently permit such a restriction, and the change would be a matter for central government. However, while I can see that it is initially an attractive proposal, I am not sure that it survives scrutiny. I consider the driver's licensed area less important than the standards to which they must adhere to. A driver's geographical familiarity with an area is, given technology, far less important than once it was, and it does not, in my view, impact on child sexual exploitation. Nevertheless, the fact that differences in standards exist across different, even neighbouring, local authorities is wholly undesirable. In my view, simply to wait for a central government response would be a mistake. As a result, I recommend that the Council commits to seeking to agree with its neighbouring authorities a stricter information sharing agreement, a joint enforcement protocol, and a common licensing pricing structure. This will undoubtedly need political buy-in, but would serve as a national example of good practice. Now, I think the reason why they've covered the taxi licensing laws within this report of the child sexual exploitation in Telford is because there was taxi drivers that were loaning their taxi cars to perpetrators to commit these offences. And also, within the report, there was actually taxi drivers that were perpetrators also. So this part of the report is giving all of the recommendations through the findings of this report, which there was 47 recommendations to improve the structure, so people can see the warning signs of young children being exploited. So this is partly why the reason why they've got the taxiing laws and recommendations on The Council's taxi licensing has for some years included child sexual exploitation awareness training for drivers. I recommend that the Council should publicise the high standards to which Telford licensing taxis are held and raise awareness of how to recognise a locally licensed taxi. Furthermore, the child sexual exploitation awareness training for drivers could usefully be offered at a cost to neighbouring authorities and to individual drivers who sought the accreditation. While the Council should commit to an enhanced enforcement regime, it should recognise the value of the public as an information source for enforcement and commit to publicising what is expected of taxi drivers and how members of the public can raise concerns. Consideration should be given to instant reporting by way of text or online services. The public has a right to know whether its licensing team is effective. Accordingly, I recommend that the Council regularly publishes details of the number of complaints it has received about taxi drivers, the natures of those complaints and their results. I heard evidence that the Council has inherited a number of premises with historic licences, those issued prior to the Council assuming responsibility for liquor licensing, that allow the presence of children at adult events. I regard the continuation of such licences as undesirable and have recommended that all possible steps are taken to ensure that those premises are subject to licences with appropriate conditions. In the meantime, the Council should indicate that it expects nightclubs to operate an 18 or over entry policy. The collection of information takeaways has been surprisingly scant, particularly given the many complaints the inquiry has seen of perpetrators' behaviour around such establishments, while the Council makes the fair point that its licensing role is particularly limited in respect of the late night takeaways. I have recommended that it reviews information collection and sharing with regards to child sexual exploitation concerns involving restaurants, takeaways, mobile food outlets and associated residential premises to ensure that full use is made of information received, whatever its source. West Mercia Police, Chapter 5. West Mercia Police Child Sexual Exploitation Team is a relatively recent innovation. I conclude in Chapter 5 that there should have been a specialist child sexual exploitation team sooner, particularly as there had previously been a sexual offence investigation team in 2007 which did not continue after Operation Chalice. Morning Snugster 101. Hope you're doing well, my bro. Hope you're doing well this afternoon, Snugster 101. Already, the child sexual exploitation team's remit has broadened to cover criminal exploitation more generally, changing its name to the CE team, and I am concerned that the team might, if charged with other responsibilities, lose its essential focus. The CE team is an extremely valuable resource in addressing child sexual exploitation. As a result, I recommend that West Mercia Police commit to its continued existence and to ring-fencing its resources and to preservation of current budget, officer/staff numbers and workloads. The effective collection and use of data is essential to providing an accurate picture of child sexual exploitation and its trends. I have concluded that West Mercia Police did not use the intelligence marker system to its full extent, and that following the conclusions of a 2018 review of West Mercia Police's practice, it is not clear whether markers have been properly applied to all chalice nominals. Accordingly, I recommend a review of practice and of records to ensure appropriate and consistent use of markers in child sexual exploitation cases. The inquiry has seen evidence which suggests that public-facing officers and staff have, on occasions, used insensitive and inappropriate language in dealing with child sexual exploitation cases and with victims and survivors and their families. This has the potential, particularly where there is a sense of victim blaming, to discourage complaint. As a result, I recommend a widely drawn training program for officers, police community support officers, and public-facing staff to address this issue. In reviewing material relating to police complaints, the inquiry has seen material which tends to suggest that complaints are not always dealt with in a timely way. As a result, I recommend a review of child sexual exploitation complaints handling, and so that issues around child sexual exploitation complaints handling may be better understood. Provision for collation and publication of child sexual exploitation related complaints. The Police and Crime Commissioner, Chapter 6. It is right that I note in particular the positive contribution of the PCC, Police and Crime Commissioner, to the improvements in the nighttime economy response in Telford in respect of funding aimed at supporting the taxi marshalling and street pasta projects, which are discussed separately in Chapter 4 of this report. It is important, in my view, that this contribution is not regarded as dispensable in the face of other priorities. Funding for these initiatives should be continued and their value should not be underestimated. However, they should not be regarded as, or regard themselves as, a primary evidence gathering source. Hope you're doing well, Snugster. So far as the PCC's oversight role is concerned, I have commented in Chapter 6 that I consider the Police Complaints Commissioner could improve its holding to account process. I therefore recommend that the regular HTA meetings with West Mercia Police's Chief Constable include provision of specific data, and in addition, the more informally weekly meetings are minuted. National Referral Mechanism, Chapter 6. The evidence that I have seen in respect to West Mercia Police and the Council suggests improvements are also needed in relation to NRM referrals. The National Referral Mechanism is not optional or dependent on child consent. To this end, I consider that there needs to be clarity about responsibility for National Referral Mechanism referral in multi-agency cases and maintenance of shared records as to referrals, and I have made a recommendation to this effect. Health Authorities, Chapter 7. It has been suggested that I recommend that any child under 16 assessing sexual health services should be referred on to a safeguarding authority. I am not prepared to follow this course. I am concerned that this would dissuade children from accessing much needed healthcare support. However, it is a concern that many witnesses I spoke to said that no questions were asked of them, although they were so young. There is a balance to be struck between making sure children feel comfortable assessing services without fear of repercussions and being professionally curious, and ensuring the duty to safeguard is being met. So many witnesses I heard from were looking for a way out and wanted someone to uncover what they were going through without having to make an official complaint. The recommendations I have made in relation to providing information sharing, training, plainly apply to health agencies. I have also made a further specific recommendation as to the need to review guidance given to sexual health professionals, not least because a health professional may well be the first professional who has contact with a child, and their attitude and approach can affect that child's future engagement with support services generally. I have seen and heard repeatedly through the course of this inquiry that a lack of resources has often meant that there has been a failure to our children. Further support once they have been identified as a victim or survivor of child sexual exploitation. Mental health services often have a high threshold for access. Those who do not have a diagnosed mental illness but have experienced trauma are often told that there is no suitable support available. While, of course, I am aware that capacity issues are increasing in a post-pandemic world, I have made recommendations that these provisions be reviewed. A view that has constantly come up is the information sharing to and from GPs, and how this has not happened consistently. It is important that GPs play their role in safeguarding children at risk of child sexual exploitation. GPs need to know if there are any child sexual exploitation concerns about a child patient, particularly when the child moves GP practices. I have been told that there is currently no child sexual exploitation code applied to GP systems to identify individuals that have been involved with or at risk of child sexual exploitation. Although I understand one exists where there are concerns of FGM, there should be one for child sexual exploitation. I recommend that this should be rectified. Independent inquiry, Telford child sexual exploitation. Recommendations. Number 1. Establishment of a joint child sexual exploitation review group. The Council and West Mercia Police should take the lead in establishing a joint group and shall identify and include any key stakeholders, authorities, to include education and health sectors, and such third sector agencies as the Council and West Mercia Police as lead agencies deem appropriate. The joint group's function will be to meet every 6 months in order to consider data and information gathering, such data to include the incidents, trends and locations of child sexual exploitation within the borough, missing persons, truancy data, referring numbers and investigations, complaints, licensing and nighttime economy information and any other data considered relevant. Analyse such data and information in order to provide a reliable set of statistics against which the threat/risk and prevalence of child sexual exploitation can be measured, and any apparent increase or decrease in the number of child sexual exploitation cases considered. Any apparent increase or decrease in the number of child sexual exploitation cases considered. Maintain minutes of each meeting with appropriate action plans attached, and publish a report setting out the results of the analysis and accounting to the public for the action being taken in response, as set out in recommendations 2. Joint child sexual exploitation review groups to publish an annual child sexual exploitation report. The Council of West Mercia Police should lead the Joint Child Sexual Exploitation Review Group in publishing an annual report titled Joint Child Sexual Exploitation Review Group Annual Report. This report should include, at a minimum, the output of the statistical analysis carried out in accordance with Recommendation 1. Current staffing numbers / caseloads ratios with the West Mercia Police CE team and the Council CATE team. The extent of collaboration and support sought from third sector organisations, including transparency about the level of funding ring-fenced for such support. Details of steps taken in relation to child sexual exploitation training and awareness campaigns. Details of PCC funding resources and initiatives relevant to child sexual exploitation. Statistics regarding the number of NRM referrals, updates as to work undertaken to improve relevant services to children within the health and education sections, and a summary of any complaints received by any of the member authorities regarding the handling of a child sexual exploitation matter. Each member organisation should publish a copy of the report on its website. Recommendations 3. West Mercia Police to prepare mapping and prevalence data to be shared with the Joint Child Sexual Exploitation Review Group, in line with Recommendations 1 and 2, in advance of each Joint Child Sexual Exploitation Review Group meeting, and for the purpose of its annual report. West Mercia Police should prepare the following: an analysis of the incidence of and its response to child sexual exploitation within Telford, a prevalence report subject to the need to protect the integrity of ongoing investigations and policing tactics. This should include a reference to the numbers of complaints, reports, investigations, arrests, charges and conviction rate, as well as geographical distribution of child sexual exploitation hotspots within Telford. A child sexual exploitation activity analysis and mapping report based on intelligence received from its own sources, including that collated via the Joint Child Sexual Exploitation Review Group, in order to ensure that an ongoing and targeted approach to child sexual exploitation is maintained. Copies of the prevalence report and mapping report should also be shared with the PCC in line with Recommendation 41. Council to prepare CATE data to be shared with the Joint Child Sexual Exploitation Review Group in line with recommendations 1 and 2 in advance of each Joint Child Sexual Exploitation Review Group meeting, and for the purpose of its annual report, the Council should prepare the following: an analysis of its response to child sexual exploitation within Telford and Wrekin, to include numbers of child sexual exploitation cases dealt with by safeguarding processes, those dealt with by CATE processes, and to details how many and new cases, how many are active and how many have been closed. Schools and colleges to prepare data to be shared with the Joint Child Sexual Exploitation Review Group. Secondary schools and colleges should prepare the following in association with the Council: a 6-monthly child sexual exploitation statement to be submitted prior to the 6-monthly Joint Child Sexual Exploitation Review Group meeting, giving details of specific children, showing indicators which may be indicative of child sexual exploitation, the Children at Risk report, whether or not that behaviour merits immediate referral to CATE or safeguarding, and a further 6-monthly report to be submitted prior to the 6-month Joint Child Sexual Exploitation Review Group meeting, containing such information as may allow effective mapping of child sexual exploitation school mapping report, including but not limited to ages of children involved, the place of exploitation where known, their general places of residence, and any information which may establish the identities of perpetrators. The above information should also include statistics and information relating to any missing from school episodes, truancy records, in order to agree any steps that should be taken in relation to children that are shown to have regular difficulty attending school. The Children at Risk report and the mapping report should be shared with the CATE team, which, in line with recommendations 1 and 2, will share the reports with the Joint Child Sexual Exploitation Review Group meeting for the purpose of its annual report. Recommendation 6. Information sharing training to be implemented in order to clarify responsibilities around confidentiality, information sharing and safeguarding. All organisations with safeguarding responsibilities, to the extent it is not already in place, should implement an immediate programme of information sharing training for all those dealing with children, or in positions where referrals to safeguarding is a possibility, to include at a minimum police officers, PCSOs, social workers, CATE practitioners, youth workers, licensing officers, teachers, school counsellors and nurses, sexual health advisors, GPs, GP practice nurses, A&E, doctors and nurses. Ensure such training sets out the principles of when information should not be shared and when it must be, including practical exercises, and ensure that the above training is mandatory for any future recruits and is repeated for existing team members no less than every 2 years, with training records to be made and retained. Ring fences of CATE team resources. The Council should commit to the continued existence of the CATE team within Telford at no less than its current strength in both numbers and budget, adjusted for inflation, for a period of no fewer than 5 years from the date of publication of this report. Following the expiry of that period, in the event of such further ongoing commitment, the Council should state publicly the reasons why and the proposals for future management of children at risk of child sexual exploitation. The Council should publish information regarding the resourcing and workloads of the CATE team as part of the Joint Child Sexual Exploitation Review Group's annual report. Ring fencing of West Mercia Police's CE team resource. West Mercia Police should commit to the continued existence of the CE team within Telford, at no less than its current strength in both numbers and budget, for a period of no fewer than 5 years from the date of publication of this report. Following the expiry of that period, in the event of no such further ongoing commitment, West Mercia Police should state publicly the reasons why and the proposals for future management of child sexual exploitation investigations within West Mercia Police. West Mercia Police should publish information regarding the resourcing and workload of the CE team as part of the Joint Child Sexual Exploitation Review Group's annual report. Recommendations 9. Council should review its subgroups. The Council should review the number, memberships and remits of all groups and subgroups, internal and with partners dealing with child sexual exploitation. Group membership should be limited to ensure effective meetings and be open to those most qualified to bring value, not be based simply on seniority. Strategic meetings should always include a practitioner, someone working directly with children and their families. CATE pathway to be reviewed. The Council should carry out an immediate and thorough review of the published CATE pathway to ensure that it sets out with clarity the model of response, intervention and support to be expected where a child has been sexually exploited or is considered at risk of future sexual exploitation, including the circumstances in which a child on the child protection pathway can obtain CATE support and vice versa. This review should include consideration of current research and national best practice. The CATE pathway should be reviewed annually to ensure that it remains fit for purpose. Implementation of an adulthood transition meeting. The Council should commit to immediate implementation of an adulthood transition meeting as part of the CATE pathway for cases where a CATE child transitions to adulthood. Training of CATE team and social workers. The Council should ensure that all CATE team members and social workers in safeguarding receive regular external training covering the concepts of risk and harm and the importance of rigorous recording of information, including details, the exploitation suffered, and naming children and perpetrators. Case file review / audit. The Council should commit to an annual external audit of no fewer than 10 randomly selected CATE case files and of no fewer than 10 randomly selected safeguarding case files relating to children who have been exploited or at risk of exploitation to ensure proper emphasis is established and maintained. CATE's information sharing protocols with schools to be reviewed. The Council should review the information sharing protocols in place with schools and update them as necessary to ensure that the CATE team shares information with schools that identifies child sexual exploitation threat levels, trends and groups, as well as individuals, with a view to allowing schools to react, monitor and protect children better. Treating parents as partners. The Council should commit to treating parents as partners in child sexual exploitation cases and should set out publicly what a parent is entitled to expect when their child is being supported by the CATE team. Approach the victims and survivors as adults. The Council should undertake a review of social care cases to establish whether there is any identifiable bias in respect of parents who are victims stroke survivors of child sexual exploitation and actions that have been taken in respect to safeguarding their children and the reasons for such actions. If the review reveals any patterns, future policies should be reviewed and training provided to ensure no unconscious bias is applied. Counselling for victims and survivors. The Council should commit to the provisions of contingency funding for continued access to counselling for affected victims, survivors and family members following the publication of this report. Council to review annually all child sexual exploitation therapeutic support services. The Council should annually review its child sexual exploitation therapeutic support offering to include services it provides directly and services it commissions to ensure that the offering is sufficiently broad in scope, encompassing mental health support and specialist trauma support. The support is available for victims stroke survivors as children when transitioning to adulthood, and ongoing support for victims stroke survivors in adulthood, including a focus on relationships and parenting. Such support is sourced from a range of providers including national and local third sector groups. The support offering as a whole is clearly signposted to child sexual exploitation victims stroke survivors and their families, and that the allocated budget is sufficient for need. The review should be published annually as part of the Joint Child Sexual Exploitation Review Group's annual report. Youth support. The Council should commit to collaborating with those bodies best able to offer replacement for community support services for children. For example, youth club provision no longer provided by the Council. Council West Mercia Police and CCG to review processes relating to information sharing in respect of risk of HIV. The Council, in association with the CCG and West Mercia Police, should review its processes relating to information sharing in the event of discovering of risk of exposure to HIV by a perpetrator of child sexual exploitation, and if no such document exists, draft an infection protocol which makes clear when information relating to risk of HIV exposure must be shared and with which bodies, the legal basis for that sharing to avoid doubt, and which bodies should take the lead on matters relating to information sharing, including identification of at-risk contracts. Furthermore, the Council, West Mercia Police and the CCG should consider whether their existing individual and joint processes allow for the effective identification of risk of HIV exposure when a complaint is made of exploitation, and if it is considered they do not, to amend those procedures or to indicate why such procedures cannot be amended to allow such effective identification of risk. Council should refresh its system for reporting of concerns. The current website-based system for reporting of concerns via Family Connect requires registration. This could serve as a barrier to reporting. The Council should institute and publicise a system whereby such concerns can be reported truly anonymously via a number of channels, whether by whistleblowers or members of the public. Council to review its child sexual exploitation complaints procedure. The Council should carry out a full review of its complaints procedure insofar as this relates to the handling of child sexual exploitation cases. This should include preparing and publicising a comprehensive complaints procedure for complaints relating to child sexual exploitation, which should be readily accessible and publicised on its website. Setting out a uniform process for dealing with all complaints relating to child sexual exploitation, led by a named team within the Council. Establishing a suitable repository for all complaints relating to child sexual exploitation, so that all documents relevant to a complaint, including ultimately its outcome, are readily accessed. Ensuring that all staff, in particular CATE practitioners, are suitably trained so as to identify complaints or feedback from service users is not in the form of a complaint, but which suggests cause for concern. Signposting to assistance which can support individuals with the process and substance of a complaint, and publicising annually as part of the Joint Child Sexual Exploitation Review Group's annual report, a summary of suitability anonymised child sexual exploitation complaints and a review of complaints concern relating to child sexual exploitation to include themes and lessons learned. Licensing information and sharing with neighbouring authorities. The Council should seek to agree with its neighbouring authorities a stricter information sharing agreement, a joint enforcement protocol, and a common licensing pricing structure. Taxi driver training. The Council has an established child sexual exploitation training programme for taxi drivers. This course should be offered at a cost to drivers licensed everywhere. In the interim, the Council should publicise the high standards that Telford licensing taxis are already required to meet, and raise awareness of how to recognise a locally licensed taxi. Council to review and improve its complaints procedure for public complaints or concerns in relation to licensing and/or taxi drivers. The Council should review the ways in which the public can report licensing complaints, to include consideration of instant reporting by way of text or online services. Publicise its role in taxi regulation, the need for the public to report concerns, and the ways in which concerns can be reported, to include prominent advertising in nighttime economy hotspots and a requirement for in-taxi notice, and ensuring a continuing programme of public awareness, raising a requirement for licensed drivers to display their licence so as to address badge swapping. Background to the inquiry terminology. Just find myself a quick fag, people, and then I'll be back. So those were basically the recommendations that were the findings from the report to help to identify the warning signs, and to help in future cases for it to be spotted sooner rather than later. And also the recommendations made, how the police can improve on information sharing, so that all these organisations in future can share the information that they receive, because some doctors say at the hospital where some of these young children were going to get the morning after pill, patient confidentiality is probably the main cause of why information wasn't shared sooner. But now there's serious implementations. I'm hoping that these recommendations that have been made can be put into practice now, so in future these mistakes can't be made. Background to the inquiry. Now, what we're about to read within this report is the terminology that was used during this inquiry. Terminology. At the outset of this report, it is important to flag up a few points of terminology. I have thought very carefully about how best to describe those individuals that are at the heart of this inquiry. Those that have been subjected to child sexual exploitation. I know from discussions with these individuals and from evidence I have seen that how they view their experiences is very personal to them. Some consider themselves as victims and wish to be described as such. Others are adamant that they are not victims and wish only to be known as a survivor. I wish to respect that and not prejudge how they want to be identified. Therefore, throughout this report, I have referred to these individuals as victims and survivors. Telford and Wrekin Council commissioned this inquiry. It is important to note, however, that the span of the inquiry's terms of reference predate the Council's creation in 1998. Before that, responsibilities for Telford fell upon Wrekin District Council, and in terms of social services and education provision upon Shropshire County Council. Therefore, unless otherwise specified, references in this report to the Council referred to the Shropshire County Council before 1st of April 1998 and to Telford and Wrekin Council thereafter. It is also relevant to note that terminology used to describe the Council's children's services provision has changed over the period under review. For example, at times it has been described as social services, child protection, children and family services, children's services for the purpose of this report. I have, however, sought to use a consistent term for ease of understanding to ensure there is no confusion, and unless there is reference being made to a specific team, the social work child protection response by the relevant local authority has throughout been described as safeguarding. In addition, in relation to the term perpetrator, I have used this word in this report to describe an individual who has been named in any account seen by the inquiry as committing an act of child sexual exploitation. That does not mean they have been convicted or charged with such offences or even interviewed by the police. Telford and Wrekin, area and geography. The borough of Telford and Wrekin, the borough, sits within the county of Shropshire, once Salop. Telford is a large town within the borough and originates from the creation of Dawley New Town in 1963, which covered the areas of Oakengate, Dawley, Wellington, Wenlock and Shifnal. The development of Dawley New Town was led by the Dawley New Town Development Corporation, with new housing estates being built and occupied in the late 1960s. The proposed extension of this town in 1968 led to the Dawley New Town Amendment, extending its geographical area and renaming the town as Telford. Telford is located 13 miles east-southeast of Shrewsbury and 15 miles northwest of Wolverhampton. It covers an area of approximately 30 square miles. As a new town, Telford accommodated the excess population from the West Midlands conurbation and grew rapidly throughout the 1960s and 70s, coinciding with major housing developments led by the corporation. Evidence provided by the council states that the 1980s recession slowed the population growth and there was a shift in emphasis from public development to growth led by the private sector. There is also a significant rural area in the borough which is located to the north and west of Telford town, which covers approximately 72% of the borough's total area. The 2001 census of the borough reported its total population as 158,325 people. This marked a growth from 1991 of 16,825 people, 11.9%, the census explained. Since the designation of new town status in the 1960s, Telford has a region and national population growth point. This growth continued throughout the 1990s, when Telford and Wrekin was the fastest growing local authority area in the West Midlands and amongst the 20 fastest growing in England. The 2001 census report that significant population of growth in the borough was the result of inward migration, 7,030 people moving in with only 5,129 moving out in the 12-month prior. The age profile was also younger than the national profile, with 22.3% of the borough's population aged 15 years or under, compared with 20.2% nationally. The census also showed an increase in the population of black or minority ethnic people in the borough, rising from 3.5% in 1991 to 5.2% in 2001, which represented an increase of 3,469 people. This was below the English rate of 9.1% over the same period. The 2001 census conduct of Telford indicates it had a total population of 133,523 people, marking a growth in population of 13.6% from 1991. In terms of geographical size, Telford accounted for only 27.4% of the borough's area, but in 2001 accounted for 84.3% of the population. This census also reported 5.9% of the population coming from a black minority group, rising from 4% in 1991. The census is conducted every 10 years across the county, and the 2011 census of the borough showed a further population increase, the total population rising by 8,300, 5.2% from 2001. The total population in 2011 was established at 166,641 people. In 2011, 10.6% of the population reported being from a minority group, which marked an increase in 2001. The borough's currently population of 179,000 people living in 78,130 households, with a predicted population of 198,000 people by 2030. Evidence obtained from the council explains that rapid growth has been predicted on inward migration from primarily the West Midlands of households with children. This has resulted in the borough having a population age structure that is younger than the national position as the borough has grown. It has also become more diverse, including phases of South Asian, African and European migration. Evidence provided to the inquiry also indicates growth in the Telford economy, with 87,000 jobs and 5,560 businesses currently operating in the area across a broad range of sectors, including manufacturing, business and professional services and tourism. In respect to tourism, the borough is home to Ironbridge Gorge, an UNESCO World Heritage Site which generates approximately £800 million per annum in revenue. Despite the growth in population and economy, the index of multiple deprivation in 2019, which measures relative deprivation from one area to another, indicated that in 2019 the borough had 17 areas that ranked in the 10% most deprived nationally. All of these areas were located in Telford itself. Additionally, more than 1 in 5 children in the borough aged between birth and 15 were affected by income deprivation. Evidence obtained by the inquiry suggests income deprivation in the area is not exclusive to 2019, as in the IMD in 2004 indicated some of the most deprived areas in the country were clustered around Telford and the surrounding areas. In 2018, the council also produced a fact and figure document concerning vulnerable children and young children living within the borough. The evidence indicates that as at March 2018, there were 55,600 people aged between birth and 24 living in the borough, amounting to 1/3 of its population, and by 2031 there is predicted to be a rise of 6,600. This marks a predicted increase of 12% from 2018. There were 370 looked after children in the borough, a rate of 92 per 100,000, and significantly worse than England's average of 64 per 100,000. There were 1,379 children in need in the borough, a rate of 303.5 per 100,000 and similar to England's average of 341 per 100,000. There were 229 children subject to a child protection plan in the borough, a rate of 57 per 100,000, and significantly worse than England's average of 43.5 per 100,000. Additionally, the council's data indicates that hospital admissions as a result of self-harm by children and young adults aged between 10 and 24 is significantly worse than England's average. In 2017 to 2018, there were 168 admissions for self-harm within this age range, a rate of 508.4 per 100,000. What is child sexual exploitation? The statutory definition of sexual exploitation within the Sexual Offences Act 2003 is limited to conduct which, in earlier versions of the Act, was termed prostitution. In February 2017, the government released non-statutory guidance which defined child sexual exploitation as follows. Child sexual exploitation is a form of child sexual abuse. It occurs where an individual or group takes advantage of an imbalance of power to coerce, manipulate, or deceive a child or young person under the age of 18 into sexual activity in exchange for something the victim needs or wants, and or for the financial advantage or increased status of the perpetrator or facilitator. The victim may have been sexually exploited even if the sexual activity appears consensual. Child sexual exploitation does not always involve physical contact. It can also occur through the use of technology. This definition encompasses a wide range of offences and behaviours. The guidance acknowledges rightly, in my view, that child sexual exploitation is complex, and by its nature the exploitation may take on numerous different forms. Victims may be seen to consent to the activities they are subjected to, and in many cases there may be no overt indication that the child is at risk. Such is the nature of the grooming. Witnesses have told me that this definition does not, however, recognise that child sexual exploitation is not always as a result of deception, manipulation or coercion. Sometimes it is simply the threat of violence that forces a child into child sexual exploitation. This inquiry has had the opportunity to hear from victims and survivors whose experiences of child sexual exploitation in many cases have been very different, but in all cases extremely harrowing. I am indebted to them for the time they have given. I know it will have been incredibly hard for them to relive their experiences, but it has been invaluable for me to hear their accounts. The definition of child sexual exploitation adopted by the inquiry, as set out in its terms of reference, is as follows. For the purposes of this inquiry, child sexual exploitation is taken to refer to a situation, relationship or context where another individual manipulates, controls, intimidates or threatens a child, or those who are close to the child, to perform sexual activities on them or others, or allow them or others to perform sexual activities on the child. In some cases the child may receive something in return. In others the child may be controlled by fear and or violence. It may be a combination of both. The perpetrator may be an adult or may be a peer. The child may become commoditized, with them being sold between perpetrators and trafficked. The definition was created following a public consultation as part of the creation of the inquiry's terms of reference, which is explained in more detail below. The national picture. Other child sexual exploitation investigations. Telford is not the first town where child sexual exploitation has occurred. Sadly, it will not be the last. It is a crime that has been going on for some time, but is one that has only become more widely recognised and defined as child sexual exploitation over the last few decades at a national and public level. Recognition has largely come from a series of high-profile investigations and prosecutions. Derbyshire Operator Retriever. In January 2009, an undercover policing operation was commenced by Derbyshire Police looking into the issue of child sexual exploitation taking place in and around Derby. The investigation was known as Operation Retriever, and it led to the prosecution of 13 men, with 9 being convicted in November 2010 for a range of offences including rape, sexual activity with a child and witness intimidation. Many of the 27 victims who came forward to make complaints against the perpetrators were already known to social services in Derby, and some were in the care of the authorities at the time they suffered abuse. Their stories began to come to light via the local charity Safe and Sound, which had been established in the region in 2002 and sought to offer free advice and support to children at risk of exploitation and trafficking. Rotherham Operation Central. Another child sexual exploitation scandal come to light was that which took place in Rotherham in 2010. Operation Central, led by South Yorkshire Police, was set up in 2008 and went on to uncover the organised exploitation of young girls in the South Yorkshire town from the late 1980s until the 2010s. It was reported that in the early to mid-1990s, community workers were beginning to notice that children within the care of Rotherham Council were being targeted by taxi drivers for the purposes of sexual exploitation, or, as it was referred to at that time, child prostitution. Following the conviction of 5 men in 2012, Rotherham Council commissioned an independent inquiry led by the Professor Alexis J. OBE, which reported in August 2014. The J inquiry found that approximately sorry about that, guys, ambulance. Right, I'm going to cut this short now. I'll continue with this tomorrow. Hope you guys have a lovely afternoon.